Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to be here. I'm John Harris, Director of Living Waters Europe. The purpose of this organization is to equip people with truth because we believe truth matters. The topic for today is very important for all of us. Whether you're a believer in God, it doesn't matter. The question still needs to be answered. Does science disprove God? Before I answer this question, let's get some basics right. Let's get into logical thinking for just 2 minutes so we understand the foundation of thinking right first so that we can think in a good, healthy way. In the primary laws of thought, we define our laws of logic like this. There is a principle called the law of excluded middle. This is a very simple principle. This tells us that every meaningful statement must be either true or false. Nice and easy. This excludes the possibility of a third option. There is no middle place. There's no middle truth value between truth and false. That's why it's called the law of excluded middle. For example, the proposition the light is on is either true or false. There is no third possibility according to this law. A woman is either pregnant or not. One of those two possibilities must be true and the other must be false. Both can't be false and both cannot be true at the same time. That's the same with the statement God either exists or does not exist. This proposition is either true or false. It can't be both and it can't be neither. One of them is true. But which one is it? How can we know? Now, in a minute, we're going to go into science, but first we need to know one more thing. We need to know another law of logic. It's the law of disjunctive syllogism. It's a mouthful, but this is part of the formal logic, specifically within the system of propositional logic rules of inference. So what is that and what does it all mean? Well, this is also very simple. The law of disjunctive syllogism, despite its complicated name, is a fancy way of saying if you only have two choices and one isn't true, then the other one has to be. In other words, if you only have two genuine choices where only one can be true, then if one of them is proven false, then the other will automatically be true. For example, if I said I have two hats and only one of them has a blue ball in it, then if I check one hat and it's empty, then I know the blue ball is in the other hat. That's because I only had two choices and I already know that one of them is empty. So when I only have two choices and I prove one of them to be wrong, then the other becomes automatically right. Now, these laws of thought and laws of logic are absolutely essential, in fact, absolutely critical when it comes to defining truth. These rules are part of our healthy way of thinking. We follow them, we use them, we also obey them intuitively everywhere. We know when someone is not following them because they tend to have an unhealthy way of working things out. But how does this law of disjunctive syllogism help? Well, we can use this law to say that the origin of life is either created by God or appeared by chance. It obviously can't be both. Now, this way of thinking, or this foundation of thinking, is very powerful. They are known as what they call properly basic belief. They are the foundation of epistemology, which is the study of knowledge. That's why a properly basic belief does not need evidence to prove it. It's what we use to show evidence to prove other things. Now, these laws have been discovered thousands of years ago, going all the way back to Aristotle. If you can find any fault in them, then congratulations, you discovered something that everyone missed for thousands of years. But please bear in mind, trying to disprove these laws leads to absurdity because you'll be using the very laws themselves to do it. So you'll be using the laws of logic to disprove the laws of logic. Can you hear the irony? It becomes self-refuting. That's why it doesn't work. Because the moment you try to disprove the laws of logic, you immediately prove them. It's like using air to say that there is no air. The moment you use air to speak, you prove that air exists. So there is no point of denying air. So I hope that's clear. So let me quickly summarize before I get into science. First of all, according to the law of excluded middle, God either exists or he doesn't. Nice and clear. Secondly, according to the law of disjunctive syllogism, life was either created by God or it appeared by chance. In other words, either life was purposefully created by an intelligent mind or just popped into existence through some random chance processes, which we call evolution. So the choices are it's either created or by chance. Of course, someone is going to say, but wait a minute, John, both can be true. God can exist and evolution can also be true at the same time. These are not two exclusive options. Well, if that's what you thought I said, then I haven't made myself clear. I'm saying that if one of them is false, then the other has to be true. So according to this law, knowing that we only have two options for how life started, if you can prove that God does not exist, then you have automatically proven that evolution is true, because there is no other way we could exist. The reverse is also true. If you can prove evolution is not true, then God must exist, because there is no other way we can exist. Okay, so I hope that's clear. Having said that, someone is going to say, now hang on, John, if evolution is not true, it doesn't mean that God automatically must exist. There could be another explanation for why we exist. For example, aliens could have created us and put us on this planet, like Richard Dawkins keeps telling us. Now, if you happen to think this way, then you haven't solved the problem. You simply shifted the problem of life to another planet. If aliens supposedly created us, then we still have to answer the same question: who created them? Where did they come from? Again, it's either through an intelligent mind, God, or it's by chance we call evolution. By the way, believing that aliens created us is basically another way of saying you think we were designed. Otherwise, why else believe we were created by another intelligent civilization we call aliens? In fact, if you follow that idea of intelligent design to its logical conclusion, it will ultimately lead you to God anyway. But someone else could say, but John, science has already proven that God doesn't exist. We can explain everything in this universe through natural means. There is no need for God. Now, if you thought that, then there is a big misunderstanding again, because science can only explain how things work. For example, just because I can work out how a car works, it doesn't mean there was no designer. That's the same with the universe. Just because I know how things work or I can work things out, it doesn't mean there is no creator. Also, science is all about things we can test, demonstrate, and repeat. It can only work with material things, things you can touch, smell, and feel, not the immaterial world, like God. In fact, the scientific methodology prevents us from digging into the supernatural. We are told this. The philosophical doctrine of methodological naturalism holds that for any study of the world to qualify as scientific, it not refer to God's creative activity or any sort of divine activity. This is what this famous geneticist says. Materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Okay, this means science can never disprove God. It just can't, because the divine is not allowed in the experiments that science proposes. So if this is true, then if science ever did manage to disprove God, it would have ignored the scientific method, and therefore it would have failed to do real science because it included the supernatural. So the evidence will be disqualified as it would be unscientific, because in science you can't allow a divine foot in the door. So technically, science could never, ever disprove God's existence. If it does, it automatically fails. That's why the way I'm going to use science to prove God's existence today is by using disjunctive syllogism. I'm going to prove evolution is not true, and since God is the only other alternative, I'll be proving his existence. I hope you can see that this logic is sound and see that the conclusion must follow and be true. Anyone rejecting the outcome will be based on an irrational bias rather than scientific and logical thinking or facts. Having said that, I'm sure someone is thinking this: John, you can't prove evolution to be false. We see it all around us every day. How can you disprove something we literally observe daily? It's a scientific fact. This is why getting our terms right from the beginning is so important. That's because there are two meanings to the word evolution. One is related to things we see in nature, like a variation we see in plants and animals, which is part of the genetic diversity, which is part of the original design of DNA. And the other kind of evolution, which claims that all animals and plants are related. That means they have a common descent, common ancestry, which happens through mutations and natural selection. Now, if you don't know what that means, don't worry. That's exactly what I'm talking about today, and I'll be explaining it in just a minute. But just to be clear, we definitely see a big variety of every kind of animal. We see little dogs, big dogs, dogs with long hair, dogs with short hair, short legs, long legs. We see a variety of dogs, but they are all still dogs. No matter how hard you breed them, you only get dogs. You get lots of dogs, but nothing else. It's the same with feline cats, which we have a variety of cats. This is observable, but they are still cats. For example, Charles Darwin observes finches with different beak sizes. These varieties already exist in their genetic code. Now, when I talk about evolution, I'm not talking about these variations within a kind. I'm talking about the idea that something other than a dog or a cat can be produced from a dog or a cat, or that we're related to a banana, or that we're related to an ape-like creature, which is obviously not human. All this was based on Darwin's tree of life. Here's a fun fact. Darwin was not sure about his own tree of life. If you look carefully above the tree of life drawing that Darwin drew, he wrote the words, "I think." You see, Darwin speculated that small changes in a kind could produce something other than its own kind through small changes that he could observe. He thought, give it enough time, big changes can happen. He just guessed. He didn't know because of his very limited understanding of a cell. He thought a cell is made of a microscopic lump of jelly-like substance, entirely destitute of texture, destitute of organs, formless lump of albuminous matter, and with no trace of organization. Basically, he thought the cell is a textureless, organless, formless, jelly-like material that has no organization. Now, fast forward 150 years, and this is what we discover. Here is a simple diagram of a cell. This is what the cell map looks like today. Of course, Darwin didn't have a clue. It is mind-blowing. We don't even know everything about the cell yet. This is what Darwin thought was a jelly-like substance with no trace of organization. In fact, it turns out to be more complicated than a fully functioning city with its internal power supply, transport, traffic control, business transaction. Darwin couldn't have been more wrong if he tried. He didn't really know how complicated the cell was. We didn't even know until 1953 when they discovered the double helix structure of DNA. On this day, in 1953, Cambridge University scientists James D. Watson and Francis Crick announced that they have determined the double helix structure of DNA, the molecule containing human genes. Now, let me show you this. It's how the DNA works. This is what a double-stranded DNA looks like. It has two sides and it's twisted. That's why it's called double helix. If you untwist it, it looks like a ladder. The rungs of this ladder are called base pairs. We call it base pairs because there are two of them, one on each side of the strand. These base pairs, one on each side, are holding the sides of the ladder, and these base pairs are the bits that hold the information about everything. It's the actual database in the DNA. This is why we have 10 fingers or 8 fingers and 2 thumbs, because the DNA says so. We have 2 arms and 2 legs because the DNA says so. Every structure of our eyes, our ears, our nose, tongue, liver, kidneys, digestive system, skeletal system, circulatory system, all the systems we have, everything is programmed in your DNA. This is one giant database full of information. Your entire physical body is built the way it is because of the DNA database. It's like an instruction manual that tells you how to build you. Bill Gates said in this book, DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. Now, no one would believe that a computer is made by accident, but we go around telling our students that DNA came about by random chance processes. If each one of these DNA strands inside each one of our cells were to be unwound, it would be about 5 or 6 feet long. That's right, one single cell, one DNA strand. We have about 50 to 75 trillion of them in our bodies. If the DNA from each cell were placed end to end, the chain would be from 90 to 135 trillion meters long. That's long. Well, do you know how long? Well, if the DNA in one person's body were placed end to end, it would extend to the moon. It will go all the way to the moon, not once, not halfway, but all the way 552,000 times. That's right. How much information is that? I had plenty more statistics like that, but we don't have time to go through it. There are a lot of similarities between a computer architecture and DNA. For example, a computer has bits and bytes. Well, in DNA, instead of bits, you have base pairs, and each one has a name: adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. In DNA, instead of bytes, you have codons. A codon is a set of 3 base pairs, which is similar to the computer, where a byte is made of 8 bits. So 3 base pairs makes a codon in the same way as 8 bits makes a byte. In computer, several bytes make up a word depending on the computer architecture. Well, in the DNA, several codons makes a gene, and several genes makes a genome. It's all very similar to a computer system. I haven't even told you half of it. Now, in computers, each byte represents a single instruction. Well, in DNA, these instructions are within the codons. Each set of codon produces the smallest bit of instruction, which are then used to make a protein. So the combination of these codons, which come in sets of 3 base pairs, are the instructions that produce the building block of all cells. This is what makes life possible. So think of these codon sets like a proper English language. Each set says something that is necessary for building a cell. In this example here, I have limited space, so I couldn't fit in more, so I just used the word John. Usually these sets of instructions produce a sentence that's hundreds or even thousands of codons, like a proper sentence. Each one produces one protein. And you don't need just one protein, you need multiple proteins, sometimes hundreds of proteins to build something within a cell. Think of that by coincidence. As you can see, DNA and computer systems are very similar, except the DNA and cell are infinitely more complicated and sophisticated. So what's the big deal? Well, you see, those who claim that evolution is a fact, they justify it by saying that mutations in the DNA are the driving force behind evolution. So what are mutations? Well, mutations are basically corruptions, something that breaks, that happens to one or more of these base pairs we just spoke about. That means the codon is now different. It's essentially broken. You see, if nothing goes wrong with the base pairs, the DNA within an animal will produce a variety within its kind. Nothing has gone wrong. That's what it's designed to do. But if you get mutations, then you break it. But those who believe that evolution does happen would say that these corruptions, if it doesn't kill the organism, can sometimes add new information to create something different, like changing an ape-like creature to human. So I believe we get a variety. Well, we know we get a variety of animals and plants and so on because it's already pre-designed. But if you want to create something new, you want to change a banana to a human being, then you need mutations. That's what this is all about. Okay, so how can something go wrong? Well, it can go wrong in many different ways. For example, and these are facts, by the way, for example, something can go wrong and add one or even more base pairs to the DNA molecule. I mean, please have a look at it right in front of you. That's usually very bad because it's causing a frame shift. It's shifting the base pairs halfway in the middle of a codon. That's a disaster because everything is offset by one single base pair. That means every word in the sentence is changed. The whole sentence changes. It literally changes the entire protein to become something completely different. You really don't want that. That's called an insertion. This, most of the time, kills somebody, kills an organism. Another mutation that could happen is a deletion. This has a similar effect to the insertion, but it removes one base pair. So it's actually the reverse. But that's also terrible. It's basically causing a frame shift, but in the opposite direction. It's taking something away instead of adding something. This is also changing every word in the sentence. This means it's changing the whole protein to be something completely different. This is not going to be good for the organism. It could kill it, or it could be agonizingly painful, depending on what got changed. Another kind of mutation that could happen is something called substitution. That means only one single base pair is changed. This is probably the most common mutation, thankfully, because you only change one of the letters. Although it does cause some damage, it's probably the one that causes the least damage. It doesn't change the whole sentence. It doesn't change the whole protein. It doesn't destroy it. It just changes one little bit. That is it, just the one little bit. There are other types of mutation that are considered very bad. For example, a whole set of gene can break off and attach themselves somewhere else, even to another chromosome. We call these translocation. Or they attach back to themselves backwards. They're also called inversions. Or they duplicate themselves and go and add themselves somewhere else. This is called duplication. This is when somebody wants to brag about having, 6 fingers instead of 4 fingers and a thumb. So that's what happens. It's a duplication. You just had a double of the same kind. Sometimes mutations can be neutral. That means they don't change anything. And because they don't change anything, we call them neutral. These types of mutations don't damage the cell, nor do they improve it. I suppose it's like having a door with many hinges, right? If one hinge breaks, no big deal. The door still works. Or if it adds an extra hinge somewhere, well, again, no big deal. The door still works. These mutations are usually just one base pair change. We call them substitutions. Basically, a mutation is anything that's gone wrong within the DNA. This could happen when there's a cell division or when the cell makes copy of the DNA to make RNA and so on. We can talk about this if you want. This error or mutation could also happen because of the environment, like exposure to harmful rays, like X-rays or something else. All right. Even though these errors are usually very bad or harmful to the cell and to life, well, evolutionists, those who believe evolution, those who believe that you can create a different kind of a human being or different kind of plant or animals, that they believe that when these mutations accidentally create something new or something good for survival, so accidentally something different happens by coincidence, then these new mutations are called beneficial mutations. Beneficial mutations are accidentally changing something in the DNA that actually, by pure coincidence, it makes it better. All right, and this is where natural selection comes in. If mutation is harmful, then natural selection gets rid of it. If mutation is beneficial, then natural selection keeps it. And when these beneficial mutations get fixed in the population, fixed means it's spread everywhere, they're called fixation. This is how evolutionists believe evolution happens. They say that beneficial mutations drive evolution forward. That's because every time there is a mutation that brings about something good, natural selection selects it. That's why people who believe in this process are called selectionists. And that's where we get survival of the fittest from. Now, let's be clear. We all believe in natural selection. I believe in natural selection. All creationists believe in natural selection. That's one of the ways we get a variety within a kind around the world. But the difference is that evolutionists are claiming that through mutations and natural selection, you can make something brand new. You can get a new kind of creature using natural selection. Well, of course, we don't believe that, neither do we observe that. And this is what Haldane's dilemma is all about, which I'm going to come to in a minute. This whole thing is building up towards something called Haldane's dilemma. But here's a quick side note, and it has to be said. Apart from the fact that beneficial mutations are very rare, when they do happen, it comes at a cost. So there is no such thing as a beneficial mutation without fitness cost. You don't hear that very often when you're talking to people who believe in evolution. I believe that people don't know about evolution enough. If they did, they wouldn't believe it, because every mutation comes with a fitness cost. In other words, there is no such thing as a free lunch. So what does it mean? Well, it means you don't usually get a beneficial mutation that brings about a new or a good trait without usually trading off with another trait or paying the cost of another trait. So it comes at a cost. Here's an example. This stops malaria, which is a very deadly disease. But this comes at a cost. Now, they don't tell you. If you go around, if you say, give me an example of beneficial mutation, they say, hey, this one here stops malaria. Malaria kills, therefore, this is a good mutation. Well, there is a cost with this that they don't tell you. The cost is sickle cell disease, which may not kill you, but it's very painful. So this mutation prevents malaria, but causes sickle cell disease. So you gained something, but you lost something else. That's the fitness cost that evolutionists don't want to tell you about. So some evolutionists could say, but wait a minute, John, some mutations don't come at a fitness cost. Well, the truth is, although some mutations may appear to be beneficial, we just don't know what fitness cost there yet. We have many examples of mutations that we later discovered came at a cost. I can give you plenty of examples, but for the sake of time, I took them out. I took out those examples so that I don't take up too much time. I might have taken up already too much time. So you don't usually get a beneficial mutation without a fitness cost. One way or another, at some point, you're going to pay. But for the sake of argument, we're going to ignore this and assume that mutations don't come at any cost. Now, you can't get fairer than that. So this is where we're simply saying, hey, look, we know this doesn't happen, but we're going to give you the benefit of doubt. We're going to say it doesn't come at any cost. Just go with it. This brings us to John Haldane and the problem that we discovered in 1957, which ended up being called Haldane's dilemma. Now, Haldane was a very famous scientist. He was a British-born Indian scientist known for his work in the study of physiology, genetics, evolutionary biology, and in mathematics, where he made innovative contributions to the field of statistics and biostatistics. So Haldane was a clever man. He was certainly cleverer than me. I'm happy to admit that. And even though he was the one who discovered this dilemma, As far as I know, he still died as an evolutionist. He knew evolution couldn't possibly be true based on his discovery, but he didn't give it up. And I suppose in a way that doesn't make him clever anymore. So Haldane was also a socialist, Marxist, atheist, and a humanist. Yeah, that's as opposite as you get from Christianity as you can. John Haldane was so clever, other evolutionists said that he was perhaps the most brilliant science popularizer of his generation. Some even said he's the cleverest man I ever knew. There you have it. He was smart, and others didn't hesitate to say so. According to Theodosius Dobzhansky, who was very well known himself as a Ukrainian-American geneticist and evolutionary biologist, this is what a clever guy says about another clever guy. He said Haldane was always recognized as a singular case. Singular means exceptionally good and great. And Michael J.D. White, who was a zoologist and cytologist, cytologist is a branch of biology, by the way, he said that Haldane was the most erudite biologist. Erudite means someone with great knowledge. So he was the biologist with the greatest knowledge of his generation and perhaps of the century. So basically, this guy is the Einstein of his generation. He was smart and super intelligent, and it appears that we should really pay attention to what he said. Others certainly did. So let me explain the problem. This is ultimately what led to Haldane's dilemma. Now, to make this easy, I'm going to read some bits from this book called The Biotic Message, written by Walter Remine, which explains it all. By the way, this is the scientist who realized that everyone got off track when they all thought someone found the solution for this Haldane's dilemma. He then corrected their understanding of this dilemma so that they can all get back on track again to study the problem all over again. Now, if you want to know more information, you can get the book, which is a bit technical, but don't worry, I'm going to explain everything as we go along. And then afterwards, I'll graphically show you what it's all about. So even if you don't follow these words, don't worry, I'll explain them and then I'll show you graphically. He starts off by saying in the 1950s, the evolutionary geneticist J.B.S. Haldane calculated the maximum rate of genetic change due to the differential survival. He reluctantly concluded, that means he was really not pleased to conclude this, there is a serious problem here, now known as Haldane's dilemma. This is how we know it now. His calculations show that many species of higher vertebrate could not plausibly evolve in the available time. So this is saying that Haldane, who is a renowned population geneticist, wanted to calculate the rate or the speed species evolve, and to his surprise, he discovered that there wasn't enough time. Evolution requires the substitution of old prevalent traits with new rare traits. There are limits to the rate these substitutions can occur. Limits that depend primarily on the reproduction capacity of the species. Haldane's dilemma examined these limits. He's saying that evolution is about changing old traits that spreads in the population with another new trait, which are traits that are better. He wanted to work out how many generations it takes to make a new trait, which is a mutation we just spoke about, to spread in the whole of the population. He just assumed we get mutations, which is fine. We'll go with it for now. He took everything into account to work out the cost of this change, which is now called the cost of evolution. What you're seeing on the screen right now comes directly from his scientific paper. He took into account the cost of continuity, the cost of mutation, the cost of segregation, the cost of random loss, the cost of substitution. He took everything into account, and I was going to explain every one of them, but we don't have time. Now, although he didn't give them these exact names, he did address them all, and he was very thorough. It's kind of like having a child. I'm going to explain to you the cost of evolution. It's kind of like having a child. If you're a parent and have children, you know they come at a cost. You certainly know that if you have children. They keep you awake all night. You pay their bills. You feed them. You give them lifts to places. You keep them alive for all their growing life. And when they grow up, they don't even say thank you. They don't appreciate you. And then you think they think they know everything better than you do. That's the cost of having children. It's surprising they actually survive. And then they have kids. And then the cycle starts all over again. Someone once said, grandkids are your reward for not killing your own children. Well, evolution comes at a cost too. And John Haldane made sure he took them all into account. Here's an example of how this works from this same book. Imagine a breeding population of 100,000 individuals. So imagine a population of 100,000. Imagine 99,998 have the old trait O, and two, a male and a female, by pure chance, have a new trait N. Imagine trait N has just arisen from O by beneficial mutation. The evolutionary goal is to substitute trait N for trait O in the population. To accomplish this goal, differential survival must eliminate the 99,998 type O individuals and all their heirs. So what is it saying? It's saying that if you have a mutation in a population and it just happens to be a good one, then the couple who had the good mutation, we're not going to even argue how they got it, okay, must outlive all the other people in that population. No big deal. It makes sense. That's how you want to evolve. That's how it works. If you want to keep the good mutation in the population, everyone else must go. When a mutation is spread across the entire population, it's called fixed. Remember this word, fixed or fixation, especially when you want to ask questions afterwards. You need to remember fixation, which means it's spread across the entire population. You don't have to kill everyone else, right? You just need the ones that with the beneficial mutation to spread to everyone else. That's how it should work. So how is it going to do that? Well, this can be accomplished in a single generation. That's the best case scenario, by the way, the single generation. If there is perfect selection, that's what perfect selection means. You do it in one generation. That is, if the survival values of O and N are 0 and 1 respectively. Yet there is an enormous cost involved. For every surviving type N, that's the new trait, individual, there are 49,999 individuals of type O that must perish without heirs. The population size must be regenerated from the two survivors. Now, hear me right. This is important. If you want a mutation to spread across the entire population in a single generation, which would be a miracle, okay, you need what they call perfect selection. That's just crazy. It never happens. But if you do want it to happen, the cost is high, right? We're talking about cost because you must survive and everyone else must die and the population must start all over again. But clearly everyone else doesn't die if one person got a beneficial mutation by pure chance. So how does a beneficial mutation spread across the population? Well, that's exactly what Haldane wanted to calculate. How many generations would it take to get one mutation fixed in the population, meaning spread in the whole population, assuming some survive and some die? Clearly, this is going to be a much slower process, but how much slower? That's the question he's trying to answer. Now, I hope this is clear because the entire dilemma hinges on you understanding the mechanism that Haldane is trying to calculate. Now comes the interesting bit, which will highlight the dilemma for everyone. Let's assume a miracle happens for whatever reason, and every time someone gets a beneficial mutation, it's automatically spread across the entire population for everyone to have. In other words, it gets magically fixed in the population. That's really a lot of assumptions. I'm giving you the miraculous scenario. In fact, let's go further because we're going to go further. Let's pretend it's even more magical than that. Let's assume evolution can happen like this continuously, generation after generation for millions of years. This book is telling you this. It's trying to point out, to make a point here. So it's a miracle every single generation, not just once, every single one. Not only that, but he also goes as far as saying, take a species like man with a nominal 20 years generation time, which by the way is very small, extrapolate backward from this known species to a time 10 million years ago. This is 3 times earlier than the said occurrence of the 4-foot-high Lucy. So he's saying, let's pretend the human generation is 20 years and the evolution of man happened over 10 million years. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but this guy has given evolution another miracle. He's given it 3 times more years time than the date given for Lucy, who is supposedly one of our early human ancestors. Not only that, but he also says this is twice as old as the alleged split between gorilla, chimpanzees, and man. Okay, so he's saying not only is the 10 million years 3 times older than Lucy, but it also happens to be twice as old as the supposed split between humans and gorilla and chimpanzees. Now, I don't know about you, but that's pretty generous. This guy's gone all the way out and he's saying, I'm going to be as generous as possible to make a point. You really can't get fairer than that. Now comes the problem. In that much time, how many traits could be substituted at this crashing pace, 1 per generation, maximum approximately 500,000. So he's saying, if we're kind enough to give the evolutionists more time than they ask for, which is 2 or 3 times more, and pretend we get one beneficial mutation every single human generation, which we don't see in nature. I'm not saying we don't see mutations. I'm saying we don't see beneficial ones. We will even ignore the problem of the fitness cost for the so-called beneficial mutations, which is why he's saying at this crashing pace. He's saying crashing pace because this is ridiculous. Then we end up with just 500,000 beneficial DNA base pairs in total. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but this is a disaster. Why is it disaster? Because 500,000 mutations is just not enough. That's because that's 1/100th of 1% of the nucleotide sites in each human. So it's a disaster because we only get about 0.0001% of the entire DNA. In fact, the actual number we need, brace yourself, is more than 30 million. Beneficial mutations. You'll see in a minute why that's important, but not 500,000. We just don't get enough mutations. So the figures are not working out. Even after being extremely generous with the mutation rates, and even after giving the evolutionists 2 or 3 times more time, and even after ignoring the fitness costs that we get, and even after giving them a generous 20 years per generation so that they have more offsprings, mathematically and scientifically, evolution becomes automatically bankrupt. But if you thought that's bad, oh boy, then let me tell you what Haldane actually calculated, because that's not what Haldane calculated, which ultimately caused this research to be called Haldane's dilemma, which was never resolved. The figures he came up with, which were based on more realistic data, were much, much worse. The rate Haldane said beneficial mutations are spread at in the population is 1 beneficial mutation every what? Not every generation, but every 300 generations. That's every 300 generations you get one, not every generation. So this guy went way above the call of duty. So what happens if we use the mutation rates that Haldane came up with, not the ones that we've been generous about? Well, my good friends, we only end up with 1,667 base pairs. 1,667 mutations. That's it. And here I was thinking 500,000 was bad, when I actually need 30 million, but I only get 1,667. This is terrible. It's a catastrophe. Haldane went off trying to work out how quick we evolve, only to find out that we couldn't have evolved at all. That's why this became known as Haldane's dilemma. So this whole idea of evolution that teaches from good to you by way of the zoo became scientifically and mathematically impossible overnight. And by the way, last time I checked, mathematics is a valid form of science. If mathematics goes against evolution, then evolution is not scientific. So why do we need 30 million beneficial mutations, by the way, to evolve from an ape-like creature to human? Well, that's because we have at least 3 billion base pairs in our DNA. We're told that humans and ape-like creatures are only 1% different. You must have heard this all over the place, magazines, TV, and nature programs. Well, if that's true, then 1% of 3 billion is 30 million. And that's the problem. Having said all that, what's interesting is that with the latest figures, the situation is a little worse. You see, the more science we do, the more we discover that evolution is not true. We used to think that we had 3.2 billion base pairs, but in 2019, it turned out actually we have 4.5 billion. That's a lot more and makes Haldane's dilemma a lot worse. We calculated the time from ape-like creatures to human to be 10 million, but it's much worse because it's actually, they tell us, it's up to about 6 million. They say anywhere between 3 and 6 million, or even 7 million, but we worked with 10. They told us that the DNA difference between ape-like creatures and human DNA was only 1%, but guess what? Since 2018, I've got other quotes, by the way, which I can show you, don't have time. According to this professor, he says the difference is more than 15%. That makes the figures much more serious. Here's another quote from another PhD geneticist. Finally, the average number of years per generation is about 25, but we use 20, giving more time, and other people think it's actually 30. So as you can see, it's actually much worse than you think. So to finish with, let me give you a graphical representation of what we're looking at, which I promised to do for you at the end. Okay, so here it is. I'm going to show it to you. If you want a copy of this graph right in front of you, this one, it's all yours. I'll send it to you so you can show it to your friends. If you put it on a tablet, it's touch sensitive. And if you put it on a PowerPoint, it also goes next, next, next with your cursor keys. So I'm going to do next, next, next. Number one, DNA. How many do we have? 3 billion. Well, actually, it's 4.5. We're ignoring it. Well, what's the difference between a human and ape-like creature? Well, they told us 1%. We're going to stick to it, although we know it's more than 15. That makes a difference of 30 million base pairs we need to change, and there is no way out. So how long ago did this happen? Well, it happened 10 million years ago. And you and I both know, I've already told you that's much less. Well, how many years per generation for a human generation? Well, we said it's 25, but it could be 30. But here we are, we're going to stick with 20. And how many generations per beneficial mutation? How many generations do we need to have one beneficial mutation spread across the whole population? That's spreading. That's called fixed, okay? This is not saying about one person. We're saying about how long does it take for that one beneficial to spread? Well, we're going to be generous and go all out, and one beneficial mutation spreads across the whole population. That means if your child is born and it has a beneficial mutation, magically the guy in Australia is going to get it. The guy in America is going to get it. The guy in, I don't know, in Germany is going to get it. That's how magical this calculation is. How many beneficial mutations do you end up with? Well, here we have 500,000 when we need 30 million. That's the graphical representation. However, if you remember, I told you Haldane worked it out properly, and he said it takes 300 generations for one beneficial mutation to spread. And that makes sense because it's a process that's got to spread in the whole population. Well, if we work with these figures, then I end up with 1,667 mutations. So that's my graphical representation of everything I told you. I could have just said that and we could have had this done many minutes ago. But just for fun, let me show you one more thing. This will help you appreciate the importance of Haldane's work. I can now do some fun calculations. What if I wanted to know how many years it really takes for an ape-like creature to evolve to a human? Let's assume it's real. Let's just pretend evolution is true. And let's pretend Haldane was right. Well, how many years would it take really? Based on what Haldane said, well, how many years would it take? Well, brace yourself because it's going to be 180 billion years. So if Haldane was right about one mutation taking 300 generations to spread in the whole population, then it will take 180 billion years, my good friends, for an ape-like creature to become a human. But they tell us that the whole universe, not life on Earth, just the whole universe, is just over 14 billion years, right? Well, 180 billion is more than 10 times that time. It's more than 10 times the age of the entire universe. Ain't going to happen. Okay, but what will happen if I use more realistic figures? Let's be scientific here, because that's the whole idea of doing science, right? That's why I say people who believe in evolution are not doing science. But let's just do science. Let's come up with the realistic figures. In other words, what if I say the difference between ape-like creature and human is not 1%, but 15%? Remember, so far it's more than 15, and it might be even more later on. So without changing anything, well, the 30 million changes, and it becomes 450 million suddenly. That's 15 times worse. So this new 450 million changes. How many years do I now need to change an ape-like creature to human, right? I'm not changing it so I can have 30 million. I'm changing it so I can have 450 based on what Haldane said. I need 2.7 trillion years. But I'm going to go one more place. And for the last time, let's pretend Haldane was wrong about how many generations it takes to spread one beneficial mutation to the population. What if it's a lot faster? What if you can have more mutations per generation, right? So let's pretend we're not going to do science anymore. We're just doing speculation. We're doing fairy tale now. So fairy tale, how many mutations do I now need if I really only had 10 million years? But I have 450 million mutations to receive. How many mutations do I need to have for every generation to spread in the entire population? Well, here it comes. The answer is 900 beneficial mutations every generation. So if you have a child, today's beneficial mutation is about 60 to 70 per child. So you get a mutation, but they're not beneficial. I'm saying, what if you have like 900 of them every single generation, and they get spread in the population magically? Well, that's what you need, and you need to do it every single year. All right, this brings us all the way back to where we started. If disjunctive syllogism is a valid law of logic, then one of the two competing views for the origin of life has now been discredited. It's completely false. I don't know how to say it. In fact, evolution is impossible. It's not even a theory. It's an embarrassment. I'm so sorry. I really don't want to be unpleasant or unpolite, but I'll be embarrassed to believe in it. This leaves us with the only one remaining option, God. So to answer the question, does science disprove God? Well, not at all. In fact, if we do proper science, we'll discover that science proves God's existence again and again. You see, God does exist without a shadow of doubt. We know it for many reasons. So today I showed you how science testifies to his existence. I only used evolution, but I could have used just about any field of science to prove it. In fact, the laws of science, the laws of logic, and the laws of physics all prove and testify to his existence as the lawgiver, even the moral law. All right, so if God exists, what difference does it make? Does it even matter? Well, I believe the answer is yes. It definitely matters because it has eternal consequences. Let me show you why. For example, is God intelligent? Well, the answer has to be yes. He made everything from nothing. So obviously he's intelligent. I can't make anything from nothing. And I think I'm intelligent. So yes, God must be very intelligent and also all-powerful to be able to create the universe. And don't forget, he created DNA and all these base pair. God invented the first computer, and boy, is it an amazing one. But if he's intelligent, does he care about right and wrong? Well, the answer has to be yes for this too. How can it be a no? I know I care. I know he cares. Well, how can I care and him not care if everything originated? He's the origin and source of all things. So if I care, then I can be sure that he cares. Are his standards higher than ours? Well, of course, yes. Since he's the source and origin of all things, he has much higher standard than ours. We should strive to reach his standard. It's not the other way around. Well, will he punish morally bad people? Well, yes, he should. Otherwise, he doesn't care. But we already agreed that he cares. So since he cares and his standards are high, then it's obvious he will punish morally bad people. Is there a hell or a place of punishment? If he will punish morally bad people, then how can he do it without hell? Therefore, hell is God's place of prison. And for hell to make even more sense, think of God as a maximally great being in all his attributes, because that's what it means to be God. His standards will be infinitely high, and his desire for us to uphold it will be infinitely high. And therefore, his punishment will be what? Infinitely high. That's why hell is a place of infinite punishment from an infinite caring and loving God. Very often we limit God's punishment because we don't appreciate his infinitely great nature and give him attributes that's sometimes lower than our own earthly judge. If all these things are true, then the only question left to ask is, where will you go after you die? Is it heaven or hell? Are you a good person? Can you see why it matters if God exists? It has infinite consequences. If God used his moral law, the Ten Commandments, as a standard, how would you do? Let's just look at 4 of them. The 9th commandment says you should not lie. We know that lying is wrong. We don't need anyone to tell us. It's written in our hearts. I don't even have to show you a Bible to know that lying would be wrong. Now, if we lie once, that makes us a liar. And God says lying lips are an abomination to him. What about this one? You shall not steal. Have you ever taken anything that's not yours? The value doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter how long ago. If you download music that you should have paid for, or watch a pirated copy of a film, that would be stealing. If you've stolen, that makes you a thief. The Bible says no thief will inherit the kingdom of God. What about this one? You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. That means you shouldn't say, oh my God, or use Jesus' name as a curse word when you're angry or surprised. Some would say, well, yes, I've done that, but I don't think about it. It's just a saying. It just happens. Well, that's what taking God's name in vain means. You don't think about it. You use it in vain. You use it carelessly. It's called blasphemy, and it's very serious in his eyes. You've taken the perfect holy name of your Creator and replaced it with a 4-letter filth word to express disgust. How much do you have to hate God or another being to do that? The Bible says he won't hold them guiltless who takes his name in vain. Let's do this last one. You'll find that you're guilty of all of them, but we're going to just do 4. You shall not commit adultery. That means don't cheat on your spouse. And many of you may say, well, I'm not married, so I can't be possibly guilty of this one. But Jesus said, if you look at another person with lust, you've committed adultery with that person in your heart. You see, in God's economy, your thought life counts as much as your actions and your words. That's how perfect he is. He can't overlook anything. We've all done those, but all we've done so far is look at 4 of the 10 commandments. There are another 6 pointing at you and me, and you will see how surprising it is that we're guilty of all of them. Even murder. Jesus said, if you hate someone, you're guilty of murder in your heart. Well, none of us are going to escape these commandments. So how well will you do on Judgment Day? Will you be innocent or guilty? Well, if you're guilty, will you be rewarded with heaven or hell? The truth is, you'll be like the rest of us, deserving of hell. Wouldn't it concern you if you spend eternity in hell? If you ask me, I would be horrified to spend eternity in hell. You see, that's the bad news. The good news is that God is thankfully also rich in mercy. He sent Jesus to take your place. He willingly came and died on the cross. He rose again on the third day, paying the penalty of your crime against him that we call sin. He paid the full price. And now, since there is no debt for you to pay, you can let go free. You see, Jesus had to die because that's the penalty of our crimes against him. It's death. It's like being a criminal in a courtroom with a large fine that you can never pay. And if you don't pay it, you go to prison for as long as it takes. But someone steps in and pays for you. If that happens, well, the judge can let you go free. That's the same with God. But what you have to do is repent and trust the work that Jesus did on the cross. The moment you repent and you put your trust in Jesus, your debt is paid. And without overlooking your crime or your crimes, God can let you into heaven. That's because God's wrath came on Jesus instead of you. How loving is that? You see, not only does God exist, and science proves it, but better still, he has given you a gift. His name is Jesus. Take it before it's too late. It's the right and rational thing to do. But if you don't, then do not be deceived. You will face God one day and give an account for every thought, word, and deed. Now, I really hope that this has made sense. My whole intention is for your eyes to open and to know truth. Truth is important. If you believe truth is important, then when you hear it, you should receive it. Thank you very much for that. Now, if you want to, I do apologetics teachings every single month. And if anybody's interested, you can simply go to answers.livingwaterseu.com, register there. And every month I'll send you an invitation and tell you a week early, because it happens once a month, an invitation to let you know what's happening. And if you want to join, to let me. And you get to choose one of 2 days, either a Tuesday or a Thursday. It's always on the first Tuesday of each month and repeats on the following Thursday. But it's all on that website. If you go there, you'll find out. So I hope this has blessed you and helped you. If you have any questions, just let me know and I'll be glad to answer all your questions.